Commerce, and I'll also refer to a couple of other groups, I believe, I think that's what I'm supposed to do, as we go through. The Chamber opposes this legislation, and for a number of reasons that I'd like to walk through with you. Businesses stay in business. It's the job of the Chamber to help them grow jobs, and it's the job of the Chamber to try to attract new jobs here to Rhode Island. As you heard earlier tonight, the Energy Office has said that we in Rhode Island face one of the highest costs for energy in the country. This bill makes it higher, which is a concern of the Chamber, as we try to attract and grow jobs here. No other state in the country has passed it. As a matter of fact, Washington had it on its referendum in November, and it failed 59-41%.
Washington State?
Yes, one of the more progressive states. I wasn't there, I don't know why, but I would assume that one of the concerns was cost. I provided a chart to you. I wrote on mine that yours looks something like this. If you find it. And I point that out because I went to the International Carbon Bank and Exchange website. If you put in the amount of the tax per ton in carbon, it tells you what the cost would be per gallon. So it was very helpful. In 2018, if this were to be actually implemented, if Massachusetts went with us, gasoline would be, according to this website, 13.1 cents per gallon more. Diesel, 15.5 cents per gallon. Residential number 6 fuel, heating fuel, 16.9 cents. Propane, 8.6. Jet fuel, which is Jet A1, if you're really interested, is 14.5 cents per gallon. And it goes up. This is the most conservative estimate, because all I could do is increase it by 5 as the bill calls for, because I have no idea what the inflation rate will be. So this is the minimum, okay? It will likely be higher. But that gives you at least some feel for it. Why does that matter? It doesn't sound like much, but it is. I did some research. We have 5 real terminals here in Rhode Island. Some of them deal in all of these products, some of them deal in partial, 1 or 2 items. But to give you a feel, I estimate, and this is my estimate, I had to be very careful about aggregating data because of antitrust conflicts, but I think we did it all right. Estimate about 1 billion gallons of gasoline coming into Rhode Island each year. 300 million gallons of diesel coming into Rhode Island each year. 200 million gallons of heating fuel coming into Rhode Island each year. 30 million gallons of Jet A1 fuel coming into Rhode Island each year. Now for gasoline and diesel, a lot of that product goes to other states. We are a supplier in Rhode Island to Southeast Mass and to Connecticut. Presumably, under this bill, only the portion that would stay in Rhode Island would be taxed. So conservatively, let's assume half of the gasoline, half the diesel, probably 2/3 of the heating fuel, and all of the jet fuel, because that goes to TF3. You're looking at, in my figures, conservatively, $122 million in tax in 2018, just from these 4 types of fuel. That doesn't include electricity, that doesn't include natural gas. Those are the kinds of things that concern the Chamber of Commerce, because energy use is probably higher for businesses. You have some businesses like manufacturing, it's probably high intense. Those are the people that are going to have to pay the bulk of this tax, this carbon tax. So there is an impact there. The way this comes back in the form of the refund is also a concern. The tax that we just talked about is paid on a daily basis. Every time somebody pays their bill, they're going to be paying. Okay? It goes along day by day by day. The refund comes back as a tax credit or as a dividend. That's the next year. So you're looking at a tax that's going to be collected, and then paid a year later. So what essentially it does is takes money out of the economy and then shoves it back in at one time, and that's a concern. I think I'll stop there. I've thrown a lot of numbers at you, but also in front of you, I believe there's a letter from IPAC, Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council, also stating concerns. There's the Business Coalition, which I do sit on, that you'll see a letter that was signed. A lot of the same issues that I've raised, they raised, included in those, you're going to hear from Oil Heat, but the National Federation of Independent Business, the Hospitality Association, the Lumber and Building Materials Association, the Rhode Island Mortgage Bankers Association, the Small Business Economic Summit, the Society of Certified Public Accountants, SBAIN, and I think that's all of the groups. They all share the concerns that I've put forward. If we're going to look at this, it would certainly need a lot more study, I think. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Also, the New England convenience store operators oppose this bill for the same reasons that I mentioned. And they actually are obviously immediately hurt because if they're on the border, especially Connecticut, if Massachusetts goes, it's very easy to pop across the border and buy.
Thank you. Questions?
Thank you for your testimony. Did this modeling take into account the reduced cost in fossil fuels due to the lack of demand over time?
I'm sorry.
So as time goes by and more people go to electric cars or better heating systems, did the numbers that you provide, did that take into account any reduction in the price of gasoline through less demand?
No, this is strictly the amount of tax.
Okay.
So that would be the per gallon. So if you used less gallons, which presumably is what the goal is,
I guess what I'm getting
the
at
state would be
is,
collecting more money into the fund, which would be less going back into. But the tax would be the same. So
Right.
if you're a higher energy user, you're going to pay the tax.
I guess what I'm getting at is, like, it might cost $2.13 for a gallon of gas right now, and then we would add in the taxes. But I guess what I'm thinking is, if the price of gasoline goes down because there's less demand, that maybe it wouldn't be for the businesses as much of a burden because of the reduction in those type of fuels. I didn't know if that was something that you looked at as well.
I didn't look at the cost, I just looked at the tax.
Okay. And then the only other question that I had, it's more of a general question, but I can understand the Chamber's point of view. Have they done anything to look into the cost of climate change on their businesses over time, like whether it be sea level rise or air quality or anything like that? And obviously in Rhode Island we have a lot of businesses that's on the coast, and we want to make sure that our air quality is good to attract people. Tourism is a huge part of our economy here, so we want to make sure that we have a clean state. So I don't know if you have any comments on that.
As far as statistical study, no, but I do know that a lot of the businesses are taking advantage of the efficiency programs. And so I would say they're doing what they can to try to reduce their own usage. It's to their benefit to do that. The other thing that you mentioned, hospitality, and I've forgotten, if you don't mind, I'll add that. Part of the concern also is that 30 million gallons is going to TF Green. We just had an announcement that we are having service to Ireland and Scotland, which, by the way, I can't wait to try and hop on those. The concern that we have from a business point of view is anything that we do to increase the cost of flights, which this would do. The jet fuel alone in the first year is a little over $4 million in tax, according to my calculation, is an increase and a discouragement to bring flights here. So that, from a hospitality point of view, would be a concern.
I'm actually a member of at least a couple of those groups, and I think everybody on both sides of this issue has to do math a little bit better. I think that, I'm also chair of the health committee, and I have an employee, I own restaurants, I have an employee who missed at least 5 days in the last few months due to his asthma condition. And most of the studies about asthma in Rhode Island are directly related to transportation emissions, usually older diesel. So I think we all have to do our math a little bit different. And what's also important on the math that I think we're missing on both sides of this is that the tax goes from fuel use and is rebated back to consumers. Where would that money go if that tax did exist? And where does it go because it does exist? It ends up in the pockets of consumers and not the 1%ers. It ends up with pockets of consumers, of people who need that money to do things like buy tickets to Ireland because they finally can. So some of that recycles back into the economy that supports the businesses that are on this list of people who are concerned with this type of tax. But on the other side of it, I think we're not being responsible in understanding the impact, and maybe the way the revenue is distributed should be distributed a little bit different so it has a greater impact sooner. So things like the infrastructure bank and having an impact on building up renewables, having an impact on efficiencies in public buildings, especially schools and public buildings, because that will have a reduction in property tax and other taxes. That math needs to be done so that people understand that through efficiency and renewables, funded by this kind of tax scheme, can have a tremendous economic impact, not only jobs, but in reducing tax burden for the common Rhode Islander. And I think that's really important math that is missing on both sides. Health impact math, tax impact math on both sides of it. If it's a tax to certain industries, but it's a dividend and tax relief to communities and their citizens, and a potential tax improvement to all those consumers also.
To that end, at least on the last piece, the business community did talk about that as well. There's no way for a business to know how much they would get back, or an individual to know what they would get back, because the way it's calculated, the Department of Revenue would have to determine how many employees each business has, which for seasonal employees, companies could be really difficult. But that calculation has to be done. There has to be a calculation of how many people, 18 or over in each house, and then if there's a head of household, how many kids they have. And that all has to be done before they can do
on the business perspective, I think, let's go back to Torrey as an example. They were able to, based on the math of when they built their solar, was able to build so much solar to have a good return to reduce their energy consumption. Imagine if there was a stronger mechanism to return incentives and revenue back to businesses so they can reduce their carbon impact and reduce their carbon fuel consumption if there was an immediate flip based on this tax. Imagine the impact of that to every business in Rhode Island if they had access to that kind of funds, to reduce their carbon impact, reduce their future fuel consumption based on a tax that hopefully disappears. Because the more people take advantage of it, the less carbon fuel is consumed, and the tax is its own self-defeater. And so it goes away the more aggressively you use it and recycle it back into renewable energy projects and efficiency projects.
It's the whole policy mindset behind that to make this shift in the way that we think about energy and carbon-related fuels and their usage. Because, I was thinking as you were talking, Josh, about I traveled to China back in 2005, and I remember I was fortunate to spend a few weeks there. I remember getting off the airplane in Shanghai, and my eyes started to burn, and my nose started to run, and I thought, oh my God, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? There isn't arguably an EPA there, okay? Biofuels just burn. It's a very industrious nation and a lot of positive things, but the point of analogy being that, there was no concern, I would arguably, for global emissions there. I do get the concept that the whole premise that this is going to affect our economy through our business, and I do get the Chamber's concern. There's a larger policy shift that is in play here that I think will drive whatever those costs are. They have to be mindful of inflation. As you get that there's inflation costs associated. but it's the policy that I
Well,
understand.
anybody who has Facebook has seen the 1971 picture of New York City, which was as bad, if not worse, than Shanghai. And so all that money in tax was worth it if you look at the New York City skyline now versus it was in 1971.
Right on. Or LA, right? Or LA used to be. Sure, thanks, James.
Any further questions for Lynette?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, no, this is the committee.